The tripling order reached the convoy 40 minutes after it left Kellett Field, and it arrived the way bad news always arrived on Barrow Reach, properly stamped, perfectly formatted, and explaining nothing. Warden Second Kessa Rin read it twice on the command slate while the causeway hummed under the crawler's treads. And both times her eyes snagged on the same line. Escort strength, revised from 8 to 24. Justification, withheld by order of the table. She had been a warden for 6 years and a transfer officer for 2, and she had moved murderers, arsonists, a Hive Queen's poisoner, and once an entire mutinied gun crew chained wrist to wrist, and never, not once, had she seen an escort tripled mid-route. Escorts were arithmetic. You counted the prisoner's friends, you counted the prisoner's enemies, you added a margin, and you rolled. Nobody tripled arithmetic. Nobody tripled it 40 minutes after departure, unless someone very high up had woken in the night with a number in their head that frightened them. The prisoner in question was asleep. Kessa pulled the cradle feed up on the slate's second pane and watched him for the length of 3 breaths. Human male, young, 25 standard, 26 at most, the intake scan said. Dark hair cropped by some detention barber who hadn't cared. A face that would have been unremarkable in any port crowd in the sector. He sat in the transit cradle with his wrists locked into the polymer yoke, head tipped back against the rest, eyes closed, breathing slow and even, exactly the way a being breathes when it has decided that the next several hours do not require its participation. Detainee, manifest KR-77. Name, self-reported, Asher Cole. Charges, withheld. Origin, withheld. Prior record, withheld by order of the table. 3 redaction bars where a person should be, and 24 wardens to move him 300 kilometers down a salt causeway to the open bench at Tell Your Spire. Warden Prime Dalvarin's voice came down the command channel from the lead crawler, dry as the flats outside. He was Mersk, 200 years old, plated like a quarry wall, and he had been moving prisoners since before Kessa's species had a seat in the Accord. You've read it, I've read it, I'm trying to read under it. Don't strain yourself. The table doesn't write under its bars, sir. The strength revision was cut at Spire Command at the 4th hour. The transfer order itself was cut 9 days ago. Whoever tripled us did it on new information, something that arrived tonight. She flicked the manifest to his slate. But the route annex wasn't revised. Same causeway, same checkpoints, same relay stops. If you triple a guard because the threat grew, you changed the road. They changed nothing but the head count. There was a pause long enough that she heard the wind working at the crawler's skirts. You're saying the extra bodies aren't for the road, Dalvarin said. I'm saying somebody wants 24 witnesses in armor standing around this, man, and I'd feel better if the paperwork could tell me whether they're meant to keep him in or keep something else out. The paperwork can't say why, second. That's the first thing you learn about the table. The second thing is that you stop asking. But he didn't tell her to stop asking, and that, from Dalvarin, was as good as an order to keep going. The convoy ran 6 vehicles now. The original 2 crawlers and 4 more that had come up hard from the field garrison with the reinforcements, plus a pair of gun skiffs riding 50 meters off either flank with their fans throwing salt fog into the dawn. 24 wardens. 1 sleeping human. The causeway was a black ribbon laid across 100 kilometers of crusted white, and somewhere ahead of them, behind the curve of the world, the Tell Your Spire orbital lift went up into the sky like a hair pulled out of the planet. Kessa keyed the cradle bay. Regulation said the custody officer verified the prisoner's condition at every hour mark. Regulation did not say she had to do it through a screen. The bay smelled of polymer and recycled air. The human opened his eyes before the hatch finished cycling. Not startled, not fast, just open. The way a door opens when someone was already standing behind it with their hand on the latch. His eyes were gray. They went to her sidearm first, then her rank chevrons, then her face, in that order in maybe half a second, and then he smiled like an apology for having looked. Morning, he said. Or whatever it is out there. The window's painted over. It's morning, condition check, any numbness in the hands? Fingers are fine. The yoke's well fitted. Whoever sized it knew what they were doing. He flexed his hands inside the polymer, a small economical motion. You've got more engines than you had an hour ago. 4 more heavies, and 2 of something light that keeps station off the flanks. Fans, not treads. Did something happen? Kessa kept her face still, which for an Ilvethi took effort. The membranes wanted to flicker when the pulse jumped, and both her hearts had just stepped up a beat. The cradle bay was sealed, sound-damped. The man had counted her convoy through the floor. Routine reinforcement, she said. Okay, he said agreeably, in the tone of someone choosing not to embarrass a colleague in front of others. Then, is everyone all right out there? Nobody got hurt picking me up. I'd want to know if that changed. That was the other thing about him. She had read every line of the intake report that wasn't a black bar, and the detention staff at Kellett Field had logged it over and over with a kind of baffled monotony. Subject cooperative, subject polite. Subject expressed concern for staff member with injured limb. Subject asked twice whether the night shift wardens were being fed during the storm lockdown. A man with no past and no charges he was allowed to see. Locked in a yoke and bound for the Accord's highest open court, and the only questions he ever asked were about other people's welfare. Nobody's hurt, she said. You'll be at the bench by nightfall. You'll be assigned an advocate there. Do you understand what's happening to you? Not even slightly, the human said, and smiled again, and this time it reached his eyes and made them younger. But you're the first person in 6 weeks who's asked me that like the answer mattered. So, thank you, Warden. Warden's second rin. Warden's second rin. He settled his head back against the rest. I'd offer to shake hands, but a small lift of the yoked wrists. The gesture should have been bitter. It wasn't. It was almost funny, and it was aimed at putting her at ease, and she realized as she sealed the hatch behind her that the prisoner had spent their entire exchange managing her comfort. She stood in the corridor for a moment with her hand on the cold metal and her heart's running offset, fast over slow. 6 weeks ago, a latch relay tug had pulled a life pod out of the drift with its beacon stripped and its air 9 hours from gone, and inside it a young human with no ship name, no transit chits, no memory and blood on the pod walls that turned out to be entirely his own. Standard practice. Genes sampled to the Accord registry, a cot in the transient hold, a file opened under whatever name the subject offered. The registry ping had gone out of courtesy and come back a detonation. Within a day, the latch relay had orders to hold him under seal. Within 3, a closed transfer writ from the open bench itself. And tonight, with the man already rolling across the flats in a yoke, somebody with table authority had read something in a report somewhere and tripled his guard. Whatever the redactions were hiding, it had a shape, and the shape was getting bigger the closer they got to the court that might say it out loud. In the days that followed, the open bench would gather testimony from across half the sector. Anyone who had crossed the path of the man in cradle, KR 77, and lived at an address the marshals could find. The clerks logged each statement with a number and a seal. Much later, Kessa Rin would read them all. The first one entered into record was from a freight master named Harlow Venn of the independent hauler Palewake, and the clerks noted that he gave it freely, and that he asked twice whether the human was all right before he would begin. He came aboard at Sorrent Gate, maybe 2 years back, Venn's statement read. Paid passage and labor, which I don't usually take, but we were down a hand and he had good boots and quiet eyes. 3 weeks he was on my boat. Fixed the air scrubber the first night. Didn't ask. Just fixed it. Left the old filter housing on my mess table with the crack facing up so I'd know why. Ate less than he worked. Sat where he could see the door. I tried to pay him off at Meridian and he refused twice, and the third time I put it in his bunk and he donated it to the crew fund when he thought nobody saw. I want that in the record. Whatever they say he is, put that in first. Then the Collis boys boarded us off the Reach Shoals. 9 of them, plated up cutting gear on the lock. I've been boarded before. It costs you cargo and sometimes a crewman and you swallow it. He asked me, polite as a clerk, to keep my crew in the galley with the hatch shut whatever they heard. Said it the way you'd ask someone to hold your coat. We heard almost nothing. That's what I can't make anyone understand. 9 boarders with cutting gear, and what we heard through that galley hatch was about as loud as cargo settling. 11 minutes. When we came out, all 9 of them were in their own airlock, alive, zip-bound in a daisy chain with their own restraints, and every weapon they'd carried was disassembled, not broken, disassembled, every spring and pin sorted by size into one of my parts crates like a quartermaster had done inventory. Their boat was drifting off our lock with its drive control board sitting in its captain's lap. He apologized to me for the mess. Master's oath. There was no mess. There was nothing out of place on my whole boat except 9 pirates packed in an airlock and 1 parts crate sorted better than I ever sorted it. He got off at the next gate and I never saw him again, and I'll tell you what I told my crew. I've carried soldiers and I've carried killers, and I've learned the difference. The difference is what they do when nobody can stop them. Nobody on my boat could have stopped that young man from doing anything he wanted. What he wanted, gentlemen, was to fix my scrubber and keep my people behind a hatch where they'd be safe. You go ahead and put that in your file too. The convoy crossed marker 90 at the 7th hour, and that was when the flanking skiffs left. Kessa watched it happen on the tactical pane and at first refused to believe what she was seeing. Both gun skiffs peeled off their stations in the same breath, banked wide over the salt, and turned back west, fans flattening the fog behind them. No call, no handoff. Her board showed their recall as a green-stamped, perfectly valid Spire Command order, reassignment. Priority tasking, cut by an authority code so senior her slate displayed it as a row of lock glyphs. Prime, our flank cover just got pulled by command codes I can't even read. I see it. Dolverin's voice had gone very flat. Convoy, close interval. Yiv, raise Spire command, voice line, I want a living officer confirming that recall. Warden Yiv was young Hessick, and the best signals tech on the Reach garrison. And Kessa listened to her try for 4 full minutes. The voice lines returned carrier tone and a courteous machine apologizing for traffic volume. The data lines accepted Yiv's queries, stamped them received, and answered nothing. Prime, I'm reaching the network fine, Yiv reported, and her voice had the careful steadiness of a tech who has just understood something she'd rather not say on an open channel. The network's reaching us fine. We are being answered by everything except a person. Somebody is sitting between us and every person on this planet, and they have valid keys. Then the maintenance barrier rose out of the dawn haze at marker 93, exactly where the causeway crossed the old salt cuts. A portable arc of stanchions and hazard strobes, accord standard, the kind road crews threw across a route 100 times a season, with a detour board politely directing all traffic down the graded ramp into the cuts. Her slate pinged with its work order. Valid, stamp cut 3 days ago, which was interesting, because the transfer route annex was sealed and only 9 beings on Barrow Reach were cleared to know this convoy would pass marker 93 at all. Prime, Kessa said that barrier knew we were coming before our own reinforcements did. Agreed. We don't take the ramp. Convoy will breach the barrier and hold the causeway, weapons tight. The lead crawler took the rail charge under its forward third and stood up on its tail like an animal. Kessa saw it as a white silence first, the viewport polarizing flat against the flash, and then the sound arrived through the causeway itself. Through 1,200 tons of roadbed, a blow she felt in her back teeth, and 40 tons of armored vehicle came back down off its tail, off the causeway's edge, and into the salt cuts on its roof. The convoy's command vehicle, Dolverin's vehicle. Contact. Somebody was shouting on the all-channel, 3 voices at once. Contact. Contact. The second charge took the rearmost crawler's treads off and dropped it dead across the causeway behind them, and Kessa understood the geometry in one cold stroke, the way you understand a sentence the moment it ends. Front cork, rear cork. 4 vehicles bottled on a raised road with kill ground on both sides, and the only open path was the ramp, the polite, graded, well-marked ramp, down into the cuts where the ambush wanted them. All units, this is Warden 2nd Rin, I have the convoy. Her voice came out of her level, which surprised her. Both hearts were hammering offset, and her membranes had flickered down to combat slits without asking. Nobody takes the ramp. Crawler 4, push the barrier, roll the stanchions, we breach forward past the wreck. Guns left, watch the cuts. The cuts answered first. Disciplined fire from at least 10 positions, and it was not the ragged enthusiasm of raiders. It came in pairs and it went for sensor masts and tread bogies, for eyes and feet, surgical patient, and her board started filling with red flags faster than she could read them. Crawler 4 lost its forward optics and slewed. The causeway ahead, past the burning wreck of the command vehicle, lit with a third charge that didn't quite catch Crawler 2 and threw a slab of roadbed the size of skiff into the air. And through all of it, through the hammering and the shouting and the smell of scorched polymer creeping into the crew space, the intercom from the cradle bay clicked on. The prisoner's channel, the one-way line he should not have been able to activate from inside a transit yoke, and the human's voice came through calm and clear and almost gentle, like a navigator reading weather. Warden 2nd Rin. The teams in the cuts are shooting at your tracks and your antennas, not your fuel or your crew compartments. They've put 2 charges into vehicles, and both vehicles were the ones I'm not in. They know exactly which crawler I'm riding in, and they're keeping it intact, which means the plan is to open this one like a ration tin once you're stopped, and everyone who isn't me is overhead expense. A short pause, and the crump of something heavy landing close enough to rock them on their treads. I'd really like to not watch that happen. So when you're ready, and please don't take the ramp, I think you should come back here, and I'll tell you the 3 things I know for certain about the people killing your convoy. Kessa stared at the intercom panel for the space of 1 full offset heartbeat. You said you don't remember anything, she said. I don't, the human said, and for the first time since Kellett Field there was something underneath the calm of his voice, some hairline fracture of bewilderment running through it, and it was worse than fear would have been. I don't remember anything, but I'm lying here listening to a textbook interdiction ambush, and I know it's a textbook, Warden. I can hear the page numbers. I know the next move is a smokescreen on the causeway, and I know the smoke is where they'll seed the crawler mines, because the smoke is always where the mines are. I know things I have no right to know, and I don't know why, and the only other thing I'm sure of, the fracture closed. The calm came back like a hand smoothing a sheet, is that I'm the reason your people are dying. So come use what I've got, whatever I am, You might as well get the good out of it. White smoke began to pour into the dawn across the causeway ahead, thick and rolling, exactly where the breach path ran. On the tactical pane it bloomed like a flower opening. Crawler 4, halt the breach, Kessa heard herself say. Hold short of the smoke is mined. She was already moving aft toward the cradle bay, one hand on the rail against the rocking of the hull, and the part of her mind that filed reports was filing one even now, cold and clear under the offset thunder of her hearts. The paperwork could not say why the escort had been tripled, but somebody had known. Somebody had read the redactions and counted 24 wardens and decided on whatever was written under those black bars that 24 would not be enough. The convoy's threat assessment of detainee KR-77 logged at Kellett Field stood at Category 4, compliant, non-violent, low flight risk. By the time Kessa Rin reached the cradle bay hatch, she had revised it twice in her own head, and she hadn't met the truth yet. The human was sitting exactly as she had left him, wrists in the yoke, and the first thing he said when the hatch cycled was "Your prime." The lead crawler, did anyone get out? 2 of the crew compartment, not the cab. Saying it out loud made it real, and real arrived like cold water filling a boot. Dolverin, 200 years of granite, who had been moving prisoners before her species had a vote, gone between one sentence and the next. Talk. 3 things. Fast. First thing. The human's eyes had changed. The apology was gone out of them. What was left was a flat working attention that took in her, the hatch, the rocking of the hull, the rhythm of incoming fire, and processed it all somewhere behind the gray. Those aren't raiders, and they aren't a rival service. They're running suppressed coil rifles in matched pairs, and they're shooting a budget. Every round has a purpose, and the purpose is never a body, unless the body votes. That's a doctrine. It's called interdiction recovery. You run it when the cargo matters and witnesses are a paperwork problem. I can recite the doctrine, Warden. I can't tell you where I learned it. Second thing, your comms aren't jammed. Jamming is loud and this is quiet. You're answered by machines because somebody with master keys put a polite lie between you and the world. That's not a capability raiders buy. That's a capability governments deny having. Whoever's killing your convoy can sign things. The crawler rocked. Salt grit hissed along the hull like rain. Somewhere forward, Brell's heavy mount hammered out a long burst and went quiet again. Conserving. Third thing, the human said, quieter. They will offer you a way out, soon, while you're bleeding and counting your dead. It will be official and it will be signed and it will say, surrender the detainee to lawful authority and your wardens go home. The signature will even be real. If you take it, everyone who has seen this manifest dies anyway, somewhere quieter, spread out over a year so it doesn't make a pattern. Not because they're cruel, because they're tidy. He looked down at his yoked hands, and the bewilderment surfaced again. One hairline crack. I don't know how I know that. I just know it the way you know a wall is load-bearing. Don't take the deal, Warden Second Rin. There's been no deal. The all-channel clicked. Yiv's voice tight. Second. Incoming transmission, voice clean signal, command-grade encryption. It's addressed to acting convoy command by name. By your name. The human didn't say anything at all. He just watched her, and his face apologized again, this time for being right. The voice that came down the command channel was older, male, unhurried, with the bird vowels of a Sarkeen Highlander, and it spoke with the perfect courtesy of an institution that has never needed to raise its voice. Warden Second Kessa Rin, my name is Reconciler Voth. I hold a warrant of the 6th table, which I am transmitting now, and which your slate will verify, because it is genuine. The action against your convoy is a lawful recovery of Accord property conducted under table seal. Your casualties are regretted and will be honored. Here is the remainder of your morning, Warden Second. You will stand your units down, you will deliver the detainee to my recovery team at the ramp, and every warden under your command will be home by dark, decorated by week's end. The alternative servos no one. You have 4 minutes. Her slate chimed. The warrant unfurled across it, seal after seal, and the seals were real. She had verified table seals in training off archived documents, and these were the living article, crypto chains anchored in the Accord's own root registry. Whoever was killing her convoy could sign things. Property, the warrant said. Recovery of Accord property item 1. The item had been listed by mass and blood type. Yiv Kessa said slowly. Log every byte of that transmission and the warrant to 3 storage blocks, physically separate them, and put one of them somewhere a search won't expect a storage block to be. Already doing it, Second. Brell. The wreck of the rear crawler, its treads gone but its hull mount still has traverse, full arc. Crew it remotely. I want it looking at the ramp. She breathed once, deep, both hearts settling into the offset rhythm her instructors had called the working gait. Then she opened the command channel. Reconciler Voth, Warden Second Rin. I have a transfer writ from the open bench ordering this man delivered to the bench and no other party. A table warrant doesn't outrank an open writ, it competes with it, and competing custody claims are resolved by a magistrate, not by coil fire on a public causeway. You want to meet me at the bench and argue, Warden second. A pause, and something that might have been respect, or might have been a man adjusting a column in a ledger. The bench writ was procured on incomplete information. The bench does not know what it has asked for. You have read his file? No. You have read the shape of his file. Black bars, yes? Let me tell you what I am permitted to. The detainee is not a person under a court statute. He is an instrument. We made him, we lost him, and we have come to take him back before he remembers what he is for. The young man in your cradle bay is the most expensive object the sixth table has ever produced, and the file you cannot read understates him because the file lists only what he has done, and he has spent his entire operational life being ordered not to show us what he could do. 3 minutes, Warden second. Kessa looked at the human. The human looked back. He had heard every word. She hadn't cut the bay feed, and what was on his face was not shock and not denial. It was a kind of stillness. The stillness of a man hearing a diagnosis that explains every symptom he'd been pretending not to count, and underneath it, far down, something that watched her in return and waited, without much hope, to see what she would decide he was. An instrument. An object, listed by mass and blood type. He asked whether my night shift was being fed, she said to herself, in her own language, in the dialect of her creche line that nobody on this planet spoke. Then on the channel, in trade tongue level. Come and argue at the bench. Reconciler. Rin out. She cut the channel on his reply and turned to the human and pulled rank, regulation, and 6 years of training into one straight line. I'm not standing 20 wardens in a kill zone to be tidy. We're getting off this causeway, all of us, you included, and you're going to the bench breathing. The cuts to the north drain into the old underway, the freight tunnels. Maintenance gate at marker 94. My service key still opens it unless they've thought of that too. It's dark, it's deep, and their air support is worth nothing inside it. They'll have thought of it, the human said. But thinking of it and holding it are different budgets. The gate will be watched by a picket, not a team. He paused and then, carefully, the way a man lays a tool on a table between strangers. I can deal with a picket, without anyone dying, if you let me out of the yoke. No, Kessa said. He nodded, unsurprised. Then put me in the second vehicle, not the first one through the gate. And Warden, when the smoke teams realize you're not breaching forward, they'll fold around your north flank. You have about 90 seconds to start moving before this stops being a choice. It took her 70. The convoy went off the causeway's north shoulder in a controlled fall. The crawler manuals would have called outside design tolerance, treads biting into the salt cuts wall, and ran the drainage line under their own smoke. Brell had grasped the idea instantly and put the wrecked crawler's launchers to work, white walls of it, blinding the cuts, while the remote crewed hull mount hammered the ramp with suppressing fire that hit nothing and asked nothing of anyone except attention. 2 crawlers had to be abandoned, disabled, stripped of cores and breech blocks. 19 wardens, 5 dead on the causeway, with Dolverin, went into the dark of the underway through a maintenance gate that opened, after all, to her key. The picket Voth had posted there, 2 recovery troopers in Warden Gray that fooled nobody who had worn the real article, chose the better part of doctrine when faced with 3 crawlers arriving in a wall of smoke, and reported rather than fought. She let them. Engagement was what the budget wanted. The underway swallowed the convoy whole. Black, dripping, 300 years old, the freight tunnels ran under the salt all the way to the spire's roots, built for ore trains that didn't run anymore, wide enough for a crawler and tall enough for its antennas, and dark in a way that made the headlamps feel like a confession. In the days that followed, the bench clerks logged a second statement, this one from a dock registrar at Velas Anchorage named Im Chatal, who had asked to testify, who had in fact crossed 11 gate jurisdictions at her own expense to do it. The clerks recorded that she was Offrit, 31 years of age, and that she gave her former designation without being asked, because she said, it was the truth and the truth should have to be looked at. Penstock 4, Hold C, Slaver Hull, save it. I was 9, her statement read. You don't forget the sound of pens. 40 of us in Hold C, Moore and B, and the civet ran the gray lanes for 6 years because her master paid the right inspectors and everyone knew, the way everyone always knows. I'm told this tribunal wants facts and not feelings, so here are facts. On the night I'm speaking of, the lights went out twice, once for 3 seconds, once for much longer. Between the first dark and the second, every armed member of that crew, 11 beings, was disarmed and bound. We heard almost none of it. The pen locks opened from the master board, which was in the wheelhouse, which was at the other end of 11 armed beings, and when the lights came back, a human was standing at the door of Hold C with the master keys in one hand, and he was young, and he looked, I have thought about this for 20 years, he looked embarrassed. He said, "You're going to be all right." He said, "The crew can't hurt you. They're in the cargo netting forward. Leave them for the patrol." He said there was bread and water in the galley, and that the patrol was 19 hours out. He'd tripped the beacon himself. Then he asked us to do him one kindness, and we would have done him any thousand. He asked us to close our eyes and count to 100, because, and I am quoting the exact words, "I have kept them 20 years, because you've all been made to watch enough things. Nobody should have to watch me leave too." We counted. I peeked. I was 9. I saw the airlock light cycle and the stars where a boat had been. And that's all. And to this day, I don't know what he came aboard for, or how long he'd been among the crew, or which of them he'd been pretending to be. The patrol found the civet's master tied separately from his crew, gagged with his own ledger page, the one with the inspector payments on it, where the patrol couldn't miss it. Facts. You asked for facts. Here is the last one. Your marshal showed me an intake picture this week and asked if I knew the face, and I have been a registrar for 9 years and I certify identities for a living, and I looked at the face of the man you have in custody, and he is barely older now than he was that night 20 years ago, which is impossible, so I am wrong. So it must have been someone else who looked exactly like him and moved exactly like him. Unless, of course, the tribunal knows of a reason a man would not age between then and now. In which case, I would like the tribunal to think very carefully about what was done to him in the years before he came to open our pens and who did it, and I would like the record to show that a child from Hold C grew up safe and paid her own way here and stood in front of the Accord's highest court for the sole purpose of saying so. The convoy made 9 kilometers under salt before the first drone found them. Yiv caught it on the rear sensor mast, a whisper of fan wash in a tunnel where the air had been dead for centuries, and Brel's gunners were tracking the noise before it resolved, but the thing didn't attack. It hung at the edge of lamp range, a matte black quadrator the size of a helmet, and watched. And Kessa understood that killing it would tell its operators exactly as much as letting it watch. She let it watch and ordered the convoy dark, lamps to combat slits, beacons cold, and in the red-lit gloom of the command crawler she finally did the thing she had been circling for an hour. She pulled the convoy's threat ledger and under detainee KR-77 struck Category 4 and typed Category 2. Skills unquantified. Intent assessed cooperative. Note for review. Assessment may understate subject. Authority for this note. Everything so far. In the cradle bay, on the silent feed, the most expensive object the 6th table had ever produced, asked Warden Suro, who was changing the dressing on a gunner's burned arm, whether anyone had eaten since dawn, and whether he could be given something to do with his hands. The second drone arrived 20 minutes after the first, and the third 20 minutes after that, and by the 12th kilometer, the convoy was running through the dark with a small patient constellation hanging off its rear arc, none of them attacking, all of them counting. "They're fixing us," Brel rumbled from the gun ring. He was Torque, slab-shouldered, and he had been Dolveran's gunner for 30 years and had not said the Prime's name once since the causeway, which was how Torque grieved. "Every turn we take, they pass us hand to hand. Somewhere ahead, something's being told exactly when we'll arrive. Then we stop being exact." Kessa pulled the underway schematic across the command table. 3 centuries of freight tunnel, drainage galleries, ore tipples, ventilation forks, half of it flooded, a tenth of it collapsed, all of it dark. The bench annex sat at the spire's roots, 260 kilometers east. Between here and there, the map offered 4 routes a crawler could survive, and the drones had watched her long enough to model which she'd choose. The intercom clicked. The cradle channel, Warden second. "May I see the map?" She should have said no. Regulations no in 4 different clauses, and Dolveran's voice in her memory said it in a 5th. And what Kesserin actually did, with 5 of her wardens dead behind her and a constellation of patient machines hanging off her tail, was carry the slate aft. The humans studied the schematic for slightly under a minute, and she watched his eyes move. And it was like watching someone read a page of plain text. No searching, no doubling back. Just absorption, line after line, at the speed of turning a key. "They expect you to do the smart thing," he said. "All 4 survivable routes funnel through the Tipple Junction here, at the old sorting floor. That's the natural choke point. That's where the next team is setting up right now. So we don't go through it. We go here." His bound hands tilted the slate. "Drainage Gallery 6. It floods to 1.5 meters this season. The schematic flags it impassable, and it's wrong. The flood gauge data on your own map shows the pumps at Calder Sump still cycling, which means the gallery's at 0.5 meters at most. A crawler wades that without noticing. The drones can't follow through the spray fog over the sump weirs. Their fans choke on droplet load above 60% humidity. We come out behind the junction, not in front of it. And before we enter the gallery," he looked up at her, "you're going to want to do something about the part where they always know which vehicle I'm in. How do they know? The same way the rail charge knew. Warden, your service didn't find me in a registry ping. The ping just told them where I was. The table doesn't track its property with paperwork. He turned his wrists over in the yoke as far as they would go, exposing the underside of his left forearm, young skin, an old thin scar, dead straight, surgical. Something in here answers when it's asked. I'd bet my breakfast it's in the deep fascia, bonded to the bone, powered off blood heat. I can't feel it. I just know that's where I'd put it. And I have stopped enjoying the fact that I keep knowing things like that. Suro the medic ran a deep tissue wand over the forearm and went very still, in the way of medics everywhere, confirming a thing they'd hoped not to find. A passive resonant tag, dormant to every standard scan, answering only a keyed interrogation pulse. And once Suro knew its frequency, the convoy's own sensor mast heard the interrogations themselves, a soft, tireless whisper riding down through 300 meters of salt and rock. Every 90 seconds, asking, and something in the young man's arm answering, helpless as an echo. Cut it out, the human said. Right here, I'll hold still. You'll be cut to the bone by a field kit with the convoy moving, Suro said. The pain will be mine. And I'm telling you it's manageable. And I'm telling you that with a confidence I can't explain, which we've all agreed is the theme of the day. A flicker of the apologetic smile aimed at making the medic feel better about what he was about to do. Please, every minute it's in me, it's killing the people guarding me. It took Suro 11 minutes, with the crawler swaying and the wound flooded with local blocker, that the human's chart said should have dosed a being half again his mass. Kessa watched the telemetry the whole time because she could not make herself stop. Heart rate 61 at the first cut, 61 at the deepest. 58, 58 descending as the forceps came back with a sliver of gray-green lattice the size of fingernail clipping, as if the body on the table found relief in things other bodies found unbearable. As if somewhere below the vanished memory it knew this procedure had a worn place shaped like it. The human watched his own arm the way a man watches a stranger fix his motor, made one joke to the medic, thanked him twice. They mounted the tag on the lead drone of their own, the one Yiv had quietly netted in the ventilation fork an hour back, and sent it up in air. Shaft and west, fast toward the Tipple Junction and past it, a small lying star streaking the wrong way with the table's whole patient constellation wheeling after it. Then the convoy turned off its lamps, entered drainage gallery 6 in dead dark on instruments, and waded half a meter of black water under the spray fog of the Calder Wares, blind, deaf, and finally, for the first time since Marker 90 unobserved, in the red glow of the command space, Kessa amended the threat ledger again. Category 2 she had written. She looked at it for a while. The telemetry strip from the surgery was still on the screen beside it, that impossible calm line descending through the pain like a stone sinking through still water. Note, she added. Subject located and neutralized his own tracking implant, directed his own field surgery, and devised the deception route this convoy is currently surviving by. Reclassification pending because this officer no longer knows what number to write. The third statement, the bench clerk's log, came from a fight broker on Meridian Low Dock named Tessic Var, who testified under martial summons and a grant of immunity, and who the clerks noted spent the entire deposition addressing the recording lens directly, as though apologizing to it. You want to know about the human, the statement read. Fine, 2 years back, give or take. He came through my dock the way they all do. Young, fit, broke, no papers worth the name. I run recruitment for the pit circuit, which your marshals know, hence the immunity, thank you kindly. I know hands when I see them. The way a being moves through a crowd tells you everything. Who yields, who plants, who's been hit before, who's done the hitting. This one moved like water finding the drain. Never touched a soul, never got touched, and the crowd never noticed it was parting. I've seen maybe 3 like that in 40 years, and I made money off all 3, so I made the offer.
Polite, he declined.
Polite. So I had Dressick and 6 of the boys explain the doc to him, because that's the business, and I want it on your record that I regret it, and not for the reason you think. 7 of mine, professionals, in a closed loading bay. What came back was 7 beings who could all still walk, more or less, which was the strange part, because pit men know what it costs to put 7 down, and the cost is usually somebody's skull. Wrists, knees, elbows, sprains and locks, and 1 dislocated shoulder he put back in himself before he left. Dressick's shoulder, I mean. He put Dressick's shoulder back in. Dressick tells it like a religious experience. 7 men, under a minute, and the worst injury in the room was repaired by the man who caused it on his way out, with an apology to my doorman for the disturbance. My doorman still flinches at polite young men. I'll tell you what I told the marshals. I've spent 40 years pricing violence. It's a market like any other, and I know the top of it. I've sold the top of it. The top of the market is beings who can hurt you however much they decide. I met one being in my life who could hurt you exactly as little as he decided. To the joint, to the gram, 7 times in a minute, in the dark. There's no pit for that. There's no price for that. You don't sell control like that. Friends, you run from whoever taught it, because nobody teaches that to a being they intend to ever let go. The bench sealed the next statement before it was an hour old, and unsealed it only when everything else had already burned. It was taken in a protective hold 6 jurisdictions away, from a being identified in the record only as Handler 9 Vesh, formerly of the 6th Table Reconciliation Directorate program. Lantern and the clerks noted that the witness asked for the lens to be turned off, was refused, and testified anyway, in a voice the transcript describes as steady until the final paragraph. You are reading the file wrong, the statement read. Everyone reads the file wrong, including the table which wrote it. You look at the black bars and you imagine the worst things a being could do, and you are wrong, because the file is a record of outcomes, and his outcomes were chosen. Listen to me. The Lantern program took 9 human children from a war the Accord has officially never heard of, built instruments out of them. I will answer for my part in that. Turn the lens up, I want it seen. We built 9, I handled 6. For 11 years, 6 was tasked against the table's quiet problems, and 6 resolved every tasking, and the file faithfully records every resolution. And what the file does not record, because we had no column for it, is that 6 was the only asset in program history who came back from every single tasking having spent less force than authorized. Everyone. 11 years. We authorized storms and he delivered rain. The analyst called it an efficiency anomaly. I sat with the telemetry, mission after mission, and I will tell this court what it was. It was a leash that we never put on him, pulling against us from the inside the whole time, and we never once saw it, because it never once failed to look like obedience. You want to know why the table is afraid? The table is afraid because it knows precisely what it authorized him to be, and it has 11 years of telemetry proving he was always choosing to be less, and it cannot calculate what he is when he stops choosing for our benefit. The legend on the docks calls him the quiet passenger and tells stories about a ghost who empties slave pens, and the stories understate him. The file understates him. I understate him, and I knew him better than anyone alive. And I will now say the thing your marshals keep asking me to say plainly. There is no column in any ledger of the 6th table for what that young man could have done and didn't. Mercy doesn't make reports. That is the entire reason any of us are still here to take depositions. And gentlemen, when he stopped looking like obedience, he didn't kill his handlers. He left. Ask the table why that frightened him more. The convoy came up out of Drainage Gallery 6 at the 18th hour into the dead sorting yards behind Tipple Junction, and for 30 kilometers the dark stayed empty and the masts stayed silent, and aboard the command crawler, for the first time since dawn, beings ate. The human ate with them. Kessa had ordered him moved from the cradle to a bench in the command space, yoke still on but slaved to a tether instead of the wall. A calculated risk that was not, if she was honest with the ledger in her own head, calculated at all. 19 wardens had watched him bleed for them, lie still for them, think for them. Wherever they put him now, the convoy's center of gravity went too. He ate 1 ration bar slowly, half at a time, and gave the other half back to the pool without comment, and Kessa watched her wardens pretend not to see it and like him more, and she thought, this is also a capability. She wrote nothing down. Some assessments you keep off the slate until you know who reads it. Warden second, quietly under the crew noise, when we reached the bench. The thing the reconciler said, Accord property, an instrument, not a person under statute. He turned the ration wrapper over in his fingers, folded it once, precisely an edge you could have cut with. Is that true? Under your law. Can a court look at me and see equipment? The open bench exists to answer questions like that in daylight, Kessa said. It's the one room in the Accord the table can't redact. That isn't a no. It isn't a no, she admitted. And both hearts ached at the way he nodded, politely, absorbing it, filing it, sparing her the weight of it. Asher, why they're afraid of you. You've heard everything I've heard today. Do you understand it now? The human was quiet for a long moment, and the crawler swayed, and the dark went by. I understand the words, he said at last. Somebody built me to be a weapon, and I got away, and weapons that walk off frighten the people who own the safe they're kept in. I can follow it like arithmetic. But you're asking if I understand it. He touched his own chest once with his bound hands. Here. And the honest answer is no. I listened to them being afraid of me, and it's like hearing neighbors argue about a man with my name who lived in my rooms before I moved in. I know what these hands know. I've watched them do it all day. But I don't remember choosing any of it, Warden, and I don't feel like a weapon. I feel like, and here the most expensive object the 6th table had ever produced looked down at the precisely folded wrapper in his hands and laughed, very softly, at himself. I feel like a man who'd quite like to fix your air scrubber and sit where he can see the door. That's all that's in here. They're afraid of someone I've never met. And if you meet him, Kessa asked, if it comes back, then I hope he turns out to be the man from the depositions, Asher said, because I'd hate to find out the file was right after all and everyone who trusted me today was wrong. He said it lightly. He meant it the way beings mean the things they say lightly, all the way down. Wake me at the next waypoint. You should sleep too, Warden Second. You've been recalculating me since dawn and you blink twice as fast every time the answer changes. Relay Cradle 9 appeared on the forward scopes at the 21st hour. A wardenry blockhouse sunk into the tunnel wall where the underway crossed the old Eastern Ore Line, hardpoint rated, garrison of 12, the only friendly door between here and the spire's roots. Its beacon was lit. Its challenge codes came back correct on the first hail. Its duty officer's voice was warm and unhurried and glad to hear a convoy had made it out of the mess on the causeway, and food was on, and bunks were warm. Kessa was reaching for the acknowledgement key when the human came up off the bench behind her, tether snapping taut, every line of the day's calm gone out of him like a lamp shuddered, and said, "Stop! Ask them about Dolverin." "What?" The duty officer said convoy. He said the mess on the causeway. Your casualty report went to Spire Command on a sealed line that the table is answering with machines nobody. Human side of that seal knows about the causeway unless the table told them, and the table doesn't brief blockhouse cooks. His voice had gone quiet and rapid, all page numbers again. Ask him something true and wrong. Ask if Warden Prime Dolverin's wound is stable. Kessa keyed the channel and kept her voice tired and warm and grateful, and asked whether they had plasma stock ready, because Warden Prime Dolverin's wound had gone bad in the night and he'd need surgery within the hour of arrival. "Plenty of stock, Warden Second," the duty officer said. "Kind, easy, not missing a beat. Tell the old rock he'll be on his feet by week's end. We'll have the surgical bay lit when you roll in." Dolverin had been dead since the first rail charge, in full view of the cuts, and his death had gone out on the casualty list in the first hour. Whoever held Relay Cradle 9 had read a script instead of a list, and the script was 3 hours out of date. Kessa closed the channel and looked around her command space at 19 wardens who had been awake for a day and a half and were watching her learn, in real time, that the route's only safe door had a kill box behind it and that her own service's beacon was the bait. "Well," said Brell at last into the hum, "food's on." The arithmetic was simple and it was bad. The Eastern Ore Line was the only tunnel out of the sorting yards that a crawler could survive, and Relay Cradle 9 sat on it like a knuckle on a windpipe, its interlock gates. 200 tons of blast-rated freight door, one west, one east, controlled from inside the blockhouse. Go back, and they'd be waiting toward the Tipple Junction team with the table's constellation, refreshed and angry. Sit still, and the script in the blockhouse would eventually notice that the warm, grateful convoy had stopped rolling toward its lit surgical bay. Go forward, and the west gate would open just wide enough to swallow them and close. 12 in the garrison roster, Yiv said, reading the blockhouse's own logs off the wardenry net, which still answered her, because the table's polite machine lie had no reason to block a signals tech checking duty rosters. But look at the log stamps. The whole garrison rotated this morning. All 12 one order same hour, replaced by a relief draft nobody requisition. Second, the duty officer who's been talking to us came on planet 11 days ago, 11 days. The bench transfer writ had been cut 9 days ago. The table had owned the only safe door on this route before the route officially existed. They were never recovering him on the causeway, Kessa said slowly, watching it assemble itself, hating the shape it made. The causeway was the loud option, the one that makes a convoy bleed and run exactly where the road wants, underground east to the one warm door. This is the kill box. It always was. The whole transfer was authored as a funnel, and the funnel was authored by someone who could write a bench route annex. She looked up. The table didn't intercept this transfer. The table designed it, which meant the open bench's own administration had a table hand somewhere inside it, and the writ that had pulled Asher Cole out of Kellett Field had been bait on both ends. And the only reason any warden of the escort was still breathing was that the man in the yoke kept spends hymns to keep them that way. Options, she said. Breach the blockhouse, Brell said. It's rated against a siege, but it's crewed by what? A dozen infiltrators reading scripts. We have 19 guns. It's rated against 19 guns, and they hold the real garrison somewhere inside. Those are wardens, our people. Alive or dead, and if alive, the first cost of a loud breach. Kessa pulled the blockhouse schematic. The interlock gates can be cycled from the gate machinery rooms directly. Manual override, it's a maintenance mode, but the machinery rooms are inside the perimeter. Somebody gets in quiet, opens the east gate from the gallery, and the convoy runs the tunnel straight through while the blockhouse is still warming. up a surgical bay for a dead Mersk. Somebody, said Suro into the silence, with a medic's gift for saying the quiet thing. Every membrane and eye and optical band in the command space moved, carefully, anywhere except toward the bench where the humans sat tethered, listening, and then his voice came, even and almost amused, sparing them all the trouble. I'll need my hands. Regulation said no in so many clauses that the clauses had clauses. Custody of person, restraint integrity, civilian endangerment, the use of detainees in operations. Prohibited absolutely, no exceptions. Initialed by every officer at every academy in the Accord, including 6 years ago by Cadet Kesserin, who had believed every word. She thought of Dolverin. The second thing you learn about the table is that you stop asking. She thought of the telemetry strip, that calm line sinking through the pane like a stone. She thought of 19 wardens, and a funnel written by her own court, and the truth, which was that the only being in this tunnel qualified to walk through a table kill box was the man the box was built to kill, and the only thing stopping him was a polymer yoke and her signature. On record, Kessa said. All channels, log this. I am releasing detainee KR-77 from restraint under emergency authority. My judgment, my career, nobody else's. Suro, strike his cuffs. The yoke came off. Asher Cole rubbed his wrists, rolled his shoulders once and stood, and the command space changed. Nobody could have written into a report what changed, and Kessa tried later and struck 3 drafts. He didn't grow. He didn't loom. If anything, he got quieter, more economical, took up less room, but the room reorganized itself around him anyway, the way iron filings reorganize around a current, every warden's body knowing before their training caught up that the center of force in this space had moved, and that it had always been on that bench, and that the yoke had been a courtesy. He was a young man of average height in detention grays, standing easy, asking Yiv with perfect politeness where the blockhouse used standard wardenry seal codes on its maintenance hatches, and Brell, 200 kilos of torque gunner, who had once held a breached airlock shut with his back, moved half a step sideways without noticing he'd done it, to keep the human in his forward arc. Threat ledger, Kessa thought. Category. There is no category. The category was the yoke, and I just signed it off. 3 of you no more, Asher said at the schematic. Warden second, your signals tech, and your quietest pair of boots. Everyone else holds with the crawlers, lamps cold, at the gallery mouth. We go in through the drainage gallery's inspection crawl. It passes under the perimeter into the gate machinery room, west side. I open the east gate machinery from inside. Your convoy runs the tunnel. We exfil through the same crawl while they're staring at their gate alarms. Nobody dies. You sound very sure about that last clause, Kessa said. It's the clause I'm best at. He said it without any irony at all, and that, Kessa was learning, was when he was most precisely telling the truth. Then quieter, only to her. One more thing. The relief draft in there, their reconciliation detail. If any of them gets a clean look at me and a working transmitter, Voth stops being patient and this whole route stops being a recovery and becomes a demolition. So whatever happens inside, they mustn't see me. They can fight 3 wardens. They can't fight me. Promise me your 3 will let me carry the heavy part. In the days that followed, the bench clerks logged a 5th statement, shorter than the rest, from a customs adjutant at the latch relay named Pharaoh Kell, the officer who had processed a half-dead human pulled from a strip life pod 6 weeks before the causeway. I've worked intake at the latch for 19 years, the statement read. You learn the arrivals. Refugees arrive ashamed. Smugglers arrive friendly. Fugitives arrive tired, bone-tired, the kind that makes them careless. This one arrived like none of those. The pod was 9 hours from dry, his blood was on 3 of its panels, and his pulse on my intake scanner read like a man asleep in a hammock. I asked him his name and he had to think about it. Not the lie think, I know the lie think. My console runs stress harmonics on every answer. He genuinely didn't know, and then he found something, fished it up from somewhere deep, the way you'd find a coin, a coat you hadn't worn for years, and said Asher Cole. The harmonics read true. Whatever else that man has lied about in his life, the name was the one thing in his pockets when everything else was taken, and it was his. He asked me 3 questions in processing: whether anyone had been hurt recovering his pod, whether the tug crew that found him would get a salvage bonus, because they should, the approach lanes were bad that week, and whether the blood on the pod could be cleaned off before it upset anyone else who had to look at it. His own blood, gentlemen. He was worried his own blood was a discourtesy. I stamped him transient pending, and I wrote 1 line of remarks, and your marshals can pull the original. The line says, subject is either the most harmless being I have processed in 19 years or the least, and I respectfully decline to guess. I have since heard which way the Accord is betting. I'd like the record to show that after 19 years on the latch, I'm betting the other way. The inspection crawl ran black, wet, and tight under the blockhouse perimeter, and Kesserin learned what quiet meant. She had thought herself quiet. Ilvethi were ambush-line predators 40,000 generations back. She could cross a gravel yard at a walk and leave it unsure she'd happen. The human moved ahead of her in the crawl like a debt being forgiven, no scrape, no breath, no displaced drop of water, a darkness slightly denser than the darkness, and twice he stopped them with 2 fingers backward flat weight, and twice seconds later, sound passed overhead, boots on grating, the creak of a sling, he read the blockhouse through its bones. At the 3rd stop, he put his palm against the crawl's ceiling, held it there, eyes shut, and then signed numbers down the line in wardenry field sign he had no record of ever learning. 4 above, 2 walking, 2 standing. Standing pair is on the machinery room hatch. The machinery room hatch was supposed to be unguarded. Scripts don't guard machinery. Voth was better than his own playbook. What happened in the gate machinery room of Relay Cradle 9 took 11 seconds, and Kessa was there, night eyes wide open watching, and her formal testimony to the open bench on the matter ran 4 sentences, because that was everything she had. He asked us to wait at the hatch lip. He went through it alone, into a room holding 2 reconciliation troopers in powered harness. I heard the room exhale. That is the only verb I have, the room exhaled. When he opened the hatch from inside, 11 seconds had passed. Both troopers were unconscious, unmarked, and arranged on their sides in the recovery position. Their weapons were unloaded with the rounds standing in a row on the workbench like a paymaster, S-count, and the detainee was checking the second trooper's pulse with 2 fingers and looking apologetic about the entire institution of consequence. The east interlock gate of Relay Cradle 9 cycled open at the 23rd hour on a manual maintenance override, and to the men reading scripts in the operations room above it would have looked, for 90 beautiful seconds, like a fault. The convoy came up the gallery dark, lamps dead, navigating on the gate's own worklights, and ran the throat of the kill box at flank speed, past the blockhouse's blind inner face under its silent guns, through the east gate and out into the long straight ore line beyond. 18 wardens, 3 crawlers, and 1 empty bench in the command space, because the heavy part, as promised, had been carried elsewhere. Then 3 things happened in the same minute. The convoy's mast caught a transmitter going active inside the blockhouse. A sharp encrypted spike punching up through the salt toward orbit, cut off 4 seconds in, the cutting off having a shape that Kessa, by now, could read like a duty log. Someone had gotten a clean look, and someone had reached a panel, and someone soft-footed had been 4 seconds too merciful, and 1 room too slow. The East Gate's work lights died behind them. All at once, the whole blockhouse going dark in the scopes like a closed eye. And the long band channel that had stayed silent since the causeway clicked, and the bird's Sarkeen voice came down it, and it was no longer unhurried. Warden Second Rin, you've spent my recovery budget. I want you to understand what you've done, because you are a serious young officer and you deserve a serious explanation. As of this transmission, the warrant is amended. The table no longer requires the instrument intact. A pause and the sound, very faint, of a man laying a folder down on a table, closing a column, moving to the next. I have known that young man since he was 9 years old, Warden. I taught him the quiet. Whatever he has been to you in this tunnel, helpful, gentle, humble. I've read the same performances in 11 years of mission telemetry. Understand, we built that. We built it as camouflage. And the fact that you cannot find its seams does not mean it has none. You are escorting the camouflage. I am trying to spare you the contents. Deliver him dead by the 30th hour, and every warden of your escort lives, and your career survives its single act of mercy. After the 30th hour, my orders stop distinguishing the package from the wrapping. The channel closed. The ore line ran on east in the dark, dead straight, toward the roots of the spire, and nobody in the command space said anything until the human back on his bench, unyoked, a fresh dressing on a 4-second graze along his jaw that he had apologized to Suro for, spoke into the hum mildly, as though correcting a small clerical error. He's wrong about one thing, for the record. He didn't teach me the quiet. Asher Cole looked at his own open hands, and for a moment something moved behind the gray eyes, deep down, like a shape passing under ice. He taught me where to spend it. I'm fairly sure the quiet was already mine. Among the later statements the bench clerks logged was one from Warden Captain Helm Durr, commander of the true garrison of Relay Cradle 9. 12 wardens who had been taken at shift change by their own relief paperwork, disarmed by beings wearing their own services gray, and locked in their own holding cells for 4 days, and whose statement the clerks noted was delivered at attention in dress uniform by an officer who had insisted on giving it despite 3 medical waivers. I want the mechanism in the record, the statement read, because the mechanism is the horror, and everyone keeps asking me about the wrong part. Nobody stormed my blockhouse. Nobody fired a shot. A rotation order arrived, stamped and chained and verified green down to the route registry, and 12 strangers walked through my gate because the paper said they were wardens, and the paper was perfect, and we are a service built on paper. I checked that order myself. I held the future of my whole command in my hand, and I checked it against every fraud index I had, and it passed because the beings who forged it owned the indexes. You want to know what the sixth table was, honored bench? It was the signature at the bottom of everything. We weren't defeated. We were filed. 4 days in my own cells. They fed us. They were courteous. They were waiting for orders about us that I now understand would have arrived after the convoy was dealt with, and would have been short. And on the second night, the night the gates cycled and their whole operations room went to alarms. Something came through the cell block. None of us saw it. The inner block door was sealed on a key that lived on the duty officer's belt, and at some point in those 90 seconds of gate chaos, that door was unsealed and resealed, and the air handler that the relief draft had throttled down to keep us docile was quietly restored to full flow, and the spare medical kit from the corridor locker was sitting inside our cell with its seal broken and its trauma shears gone. Left, we eventually understood, so we'd know the lock was nothing if we truly needed out, and taken, we eventually understood, because somewhere above us somebody was bleeding and wouldn't say so. Whoever came through that block was inside the most alert hostile strongpoint on the planet, mid-alarm, with every reason to go straight to the gate and none to detour. It detoured. It found 12 caged strangers it had never met and gave us air and a way out and the dignity of choosing, and it never even let us see it, so we couldn't be punished for witnessing. The marshals tell me the file on that being is mostly black bars. Fine, I commanded the place his enemies turned into a trap for him, and I will tell this court what should be written between the bars. They sent a weapon down my tunnel. Honored bench. What came through my cell block was a warden, better than the ones who took my blockhouse, better that night than me. The ore line died at the 26th hour, 40 kilometers short of the spire's roots, in a rolling string of demolition charges that Yiv's mast heard coming down the rock for 3 full seconds before the dust wall arrived. Voth, spending his amended budget, dropping 300 years of tunnel across their path, with the unhurried thoroughness of a man closing a ledger, column. The convoy braked in a brown fog of pulverized salt with its forward lamps showing a wall where a route had been. He's not trying to kill us in here, Kessa said, reading the seismic plot. Every charge was ahead of us. He's shelling us out of the ground. Up the Carberry tipple, Asher agreed, at the schematic before she turned to it. It's the only intact shaft in reach. It surfaces at the old loading yards, and from the loading yards to the Spire freight gate is 60 kilometers of open flat with no cover taller than a marker post. He spent the tunnel to buy himself a daylight surface run against a convoy with no flank screen and no air. It's a good trade. I'd have made it. A pause, 1 heartbeat long, and then quieter. Most of me hates how easily I just said that. They came up the Carberry tipple into the low gold light of Barrow Reach's second morning. 3 crawlers in a spaced line, hatches down, running east across a white emptiness with the spire standing off the horizon like a thread of glass. And the table's constellation found them inside of 10 minutes. No drones now. High contrails, paired, patient, on station beyond the reach of anything a crawler carried, spotting for something, and Yiv found the something on the long band. Encrypted fire coordination traffic, 2 distinct ground teams, leapfrogging east ahead of them along the line of the old ore road. Voth was not chasing them to the spire. He was furnishing the route. Inside the command crawler, Yiv had spent the night doing quiet violence to the 4 seconds of transmission the blockhouse had gotten off, and at the 28th hour she straightened, and her voice had the flat care of a tech holding something with tongs. It's a confirmation order. Second, recipient acknowledges visual identification of subject. The subject line is she turned the pane lantern 6, and there's an annex. Protocols authorized for terminal recovery. The first one listed is called voice. There's a string attached to it marked for field officers. Eyes only, I cracked half of it. It's words second. It's just words. A spoken phrase sequence. Asher had gone completely still on the bench. Not the working stillness, the listening stillness she'd watched all the way down the underway. A different stillness. Total. Like a man standing very carefully on ice he has just heard crack. Lantern. The word came out of him strangely. Tried twice. Lantern. Lantern 6. And then his breath went out of him, and his hands closed on the bench edge, and Kessa watched the polymer flex, watched the man who'd ridden firefights and field surgery without his pulse-cracking 60 sit there gray-faced and shaking over a noun. Asher. I know that name. His voice was low and rapid, and the bewilderment was gone. This was worse. This was recognition, coming up from below like deep water finding a crack. Not remember. No. The way you know your own footsteps on a stair. Somebody used to say it down a corridor, lights out, 9 doors, a voice at each door, lantern 1, good night, lantern 2, Good night, and we answered all the way down, every night, 9 of us. I can hear the 9 of us, Warden. I can hear which door was mine. He stopped, he took a breath and folded the shaking flat with an effort that was its own kind of violence, and looked up at her with the gray eyes blown wide. There are 8 more. Whatever I am, there are 8 more of me, and they're still inside, and they still answer at the doors. That's what I left. That's what I left, and I made myself forget it, because, and there he hit a wall in himself and stood swaying at the foot of it. Why would I do that? Who forgets that on purpose? In the days that followed, the bench clerks logged the statement they would all, privately in the corridors afterward, call the keystone. It came from a licensed memory surgeon on Vela's anchorage named Aurea Fell, Gray Clinic, the trade said, the license real, the clientele unrecorded, who walked into a marshal's office of her own accord the morning the table warrant hit the public dockets, set her instruments case on the counter, and said she'd been waiting 3 years for someone to come asking, and had decided to stop waiting. He came to my clinic 3 years ago, her statement read. Young human male, alone calm, paid in untraceable script, double rate, which buys no questions and I ask none, but my intake protocols run regardless, because the law on consent is the one law I have never sold. Full neural baseline before any procedure. I want the tribunal to understand what I saw on that baseline, because I have practiced for 30 years on 4 species, and I will not see its like again. Conditioning architecture. Implanted command structures, verbal trigger lattices, obedience anchors, kill authorization pathways, the whole grammar of a built instrument wired through that young man's memory like rebar through concrete, not therapy-grade suggestion. Industrial, years deep, childhood deep. Somebody had poured a weapon into a person and let it set. He asked me to take everything. Total autobiographical excision. Every name, every face, every year. I refused. I told him no surgeon alive does total wipes. The substrate doesn't survive it clean, and he sat there in my chair, polite as a junior clerk, and corrected me. He knew the architecture better than I did. He'd had 3 years awake inside it to study the thing they'd built in him, and he had found what its designers never wrote down. The triggers were anchored in autobiographical memory. The voice protocols, the obedience lattice, every leash they'd laid, all of it gripped him by the remembering. And the skills, and the tribunal should hear this in his own words, I wrote them down that night with my own hand. I have carried the page for 3 years, he said. The orders live in my memory. The work lives lower down, in the hands, in the spine, where remembering doesn't reach. Take the memory and you take their grip on me, and the work stays. And the work was never the part of me that was theirs. And then he said the part I carry. He said, there's a thing I know that they can never be allowed to pull out of me, and I can't keep it from them while I remember it. So I need you to burn the library to save one book, and the book isn't in the library. I asked him, because consent law is the law I don't sell, I asked if he understood he would lose himself, and he smiled. Tribunal. He smiled like he was apologizing for the fuss, and he said, ma'am, the self they gave me isn't worth keeping. Whatever grows back is at least mine. I performed the excision over 9 sessions. Cleanest architecture collapse I have ever charted, every trigger lattice died with the memories it gripped, like ivy when the wall comes down. And the last thing he did in my clinic, the very last, before the final session took the clinic itself out of his head, he left an envelope of script for my night assistant, whose respirator he'd repaired during session 4, while sedated below the level my monitors called possible. Then he lay down and let me take the rest. You are trying him as an instrument of the 6th table. I am here to certify, under my license and oath with my baseline charts and evidence, that the instrument was demolished 3 years ago in my chair by its own consent and instruction. The only such consent and instruction in program, history. What walked out of my clinic owed the table nothing, remembered nothing, and was nothing the table ever built. You want to know what the table is hunting, tribunal? The table is hunting the proof that its leash can be cut. He's the proof. He cut it himself with my hands. Kessa read none of that until weeks after. What she had at the 29th hour, in a crawler running east across open salt with fire teams leapfrogging her flank, was a shaking young man folding himself back to stillness, a cracked annex naming a voice protocol, and a pattern her report-writing mind had finally fully assembled, and she laid it out loud, flat, the way Dalverin had taught her to brief, because he had earned hearing it. They're not afraid you'll remember what you did, Asher. The file lists what you did. The file is the part they can live with. They're afraid of what you took. Voth called you the most expensive object the table ever produced, but he amended the warrant to terminal the moment you slip the box. And you don't burn the most expensive object you own unless the object knows something that costs more than the object. You hid something. Before the wipe. Something they can't locate and can't risk surfacing. And the wipe means they can't interrogate it out of you, and that's why the orders say dead, not recovered. The legend, the file, the warrant, every version of you they're afraid of is understated, because the true version is the one even you can't read. Both hearts were running hard and level, and it also means something else, and you need to hear me say it. They have 8 more lanterns and a voice protocol, and you have a wall where your memory was. If those words still work on you, this convoy is carrying its own ambush. If they don't, then you are the only being in the galaxy who has ever stood outside that program's reach, and Voth knows it, and that is the thing he cannot allow the open bench to put on a public docket. The human took this the way he took everything, quietly, all the way in. Then he looked out the forward slit at the thread of glass standing on the horizon and asked the only question left. So if he gets one clean chance to speak to me before we reach that court, Asher Cole said, what do I do if the man from the file answers? The Flats answered before she could. The first fire team caught them at the dry channel crossing 12 kilometers short of the gate. A Hull breaker team dug into the channel's far lip behind portable mirage screens that had fooled the scopes for an hour, and their opening salvo was 2 shoulder-launched penetrators that should have opened the command crawler like fruit. They didn't, because 30 seconds earlier Asher had gone quiet mid-sentence, tilted his head at the channel the way he'd tilted it at engine noise on the first morning and said, stop the convoy, the birds. There were birds on Barrow Reach, leather-winged salt skimmers that worked the channel margins in flocks of hundreds, and the channel ahead was empty of them for 1 kilometer exactly, a hole in the pattern of the world, and a man who had once read a blockhouse through its bones had read it at a glance through a viewport at speed. The convoy braked. The penetrators, fired on a timing solution instead of a sight picture, crossed an empty crossing. The fight that followed cost 4 minutes and the rest of Crawler 2. It took its killing blow broadside, shielding the command vehicle's flank. Brell's decision, made with treads and not words, and its crew came out through the smoke with 2 wounded and the breech blocks under their arms. And Kessa fought the action the way Asher called it from the bench, his voice level over the hammering. Mirage screens angle their lie east this time of morning. Have your gunner walk fire 2 mils left of every flash. Their doctrine pulls wounded leftward, so the gap opens on their right in 40 seconds. Now the channel lip, they'll displace under their own smoke. And the displacement, when it came, ran into a fire plan that had been waiting for it by name. They left the hull breaker team zip-bound in its own hide with its launchers disassembled, because the convoy had standards now, and the standards had an author. 16 wardens effective, Suro reported, when the convoy rolled again, slower, on 5.5 vehicles worth of parts spread across 3 hulls. 2 more wounded stable. Ammunition at 40%. We can't do that twice. We won't be offered it twice, Asher said quietly, watching the thread of glass grow on the horizon. That was the last toll booth. Everything Voth has left is standing at the gate, because the gate is where the story ends no matter who writes it. He knows we know the blockhouse trick. He knows we'll see the costume. He's not hiding anymore, he's holding ground, and a holding force in Warden Gray means the next move isn't tactics. It's testimony, his or ours, told to whoever's watching when the shooting starts. He's going to make the Accord watch us die as mutineers. He looked at Kessa, and something in the gray eyes had gone very old for a man with 6 weeks of memory. Unless we give the Accord something better to watch. The Spire freight gate resolved on the scopes at the 30th hour exactly. The great western intake of the orbital lift's ground anchor, a canyon of alloy and floodlight at the foot of a tower that went up out of sight, and its approach plaza was reassuringly, correctly garrisoned. Warden Gray on the walls, warden crawlers at the chicane, wardenry beacons singing the right codes into the morning. 22 on the walls, Asher said softly, glassing the plaza from the commander's slit, and his voice had gone to page numbers again. Warden Gray, wardenry kit, and every one of them is wearing it the way I'd wear it, Warden second. Slings rigged for retention, not parade. Boots laced for ground they expect to fight on. The chicane crawlers are parked at interlocking angles your service manual doesn't teach, because your service manual assumes the threat comes from outside the gate. He lowered the optics. It's the blockhouse again, but bigger, and in daylight, and the bench is on the far side of it. He's holding the door to your own courthouse, and the garrison inside the spire has no idea, because every signal in and out is going through his polite machines. Magistrate Liam is inside that tower, Kessa said. The Ritz author, the one being on this planet with the authority to break the table's seals in open session, and she thinks her detainee is arriving with a routine escort an hour late. And between her and us, said Brell, 22 of his dressed as 18 of ours plus spares on prepared ground, with fire teams closing the flats behind us. We drive into that plaza. We're delivering him to the one place on Bear Ridge where shooting us reads as wardens repelling a rogue convoy. The long band clicked right on schedule, The courtesy of a man who had watched them glass his gate and wanted them to know it. 30th hour, Warden Second, said Reconciler Voth. You kept your convoy alive a full day past my projection, which I want noted with respect. I've commanded recoveries against line regiments that gave me less trouble than your 19. Here is the last door I am permitted to hold open. Send him across the plaza alone, on foot, and the moment he is in my custody, every machine between you and Spire Command goes silent forever. Your casualty lists clear, your wardens are decorated, the bench is told a recovery exercise concluded, and you, Warden Second Rin, retire in 40 years with a record any officer would envy in one sealed file you'll never have to read. Or drive in, and I will explain to the Accord, with documentation, how a young officer was compromised by an asset's conditioning into firing on her own service at the gates of her own court. Both stories are ready, Warden. I've written them already. You're only choosing which one gets the bodies. And then, before Kessa could answer, before her membranes had even finished flickering down to slits, the channel caught a second voice, close-mic'd, calm, polite, and bone-deep, tired of being spent for. Reconciler, said Asher Cole, leaning on the back of her command chair, speaking past her into the pickup like a man finally taking his own call. It's 6. Let's talk about the plaza. The silence on the long band lasted 4 full seconds, and Kessa would have paid a year's wage to see the other end of it. 6. Voth's voice came back changed, lower, careful, the courtesy still in place, but the institution gone out from under it, and underneath, unmistakable to anyone who had spent a day learning to read this particular war. Fear, old fear, the kind of being has lived alongside so long it has a chair at his table. You sound well, do you know my voice? I know my voice does something to your breathing on the exhale, Asher said. I know you placed your fire teams in even pairs, and even pairs means doctrine, and your doctrine means you train the trainers. The rest is a wall with smoke behind it. So no, Reconciler, I don't know you. I've just spent 30 hours learning that some part of me was your best work, and I'm calling to discuss the part that wasn't. Here's my offer. I walk your plaza alone on foot, unarmed, dead slow, hands where your 22 can see them. You get your one clean chance at the most expensive object you ever lost. Every optic, every barrel, every protocol, all of it pointed at me, in the open, in daylight. In exchange, the convoy holds at the chicane and not one warden crosses your line. That's the whole deal. You get me. They get left out of the accounting. No, said Kessa Rin. She said it on the open pickup, flatly, and officers know, and put her hand over the mic a half-second too late to keep it off the band, and didn't care. Warden Second, Asher began gently. You came to me, in my custody, under my writ, and my writ says the open bench and no other party. Both hearts were perfectly level now. Somewhere in the last 30 hours she had crossed out of fear's jurisdiction altogether. And you are not equipment, and I am not spending you, and that is a finding of fact by the only officer on this salt with lawful custody of your person. You want to walk that plaza, you walk it as my detainee under my escort and transfer to my court. And if the table wants to murder a warden convoy on its own courthouse steps, in front of its own court, then we will make them do exactly that, in the open, in daylight, where it can never afterward be redacted. That's my offer, Reconciler, she said, lifting her hand off the mic. And it's the only one on the table, because the detainee doesn't have signing authority over himself. The convoy rolls in 5 minutes. All of us, him in the middle. Choose your story. She cut the channel. The command space was very quiet. 18 wardens looking at her with something that had stopped being chain of command obedience somewhere around. The underway and become the older thing underneath it, the thing chains of command are built to imitate. He'll shoot, Asher said softly. You know the math. 22 prepared guns on walls against a convoy in a chicane. I know the math, Kessa said. Yiv, tell him about the math. Yiv turned her pane around. On it, a schematic of the lift anchor's western gate, and threaded through it, drawn in patient signal tech green, a single line that did not pass through any network, polite machine, or table-held relay. The freight scheduling conduit, a hard-wired, 3-century-old, electromechanically dumb cable running from a junction pillar in the plaza's chicane directly up into lift control, where every scheduled load was hand-logged by bench clerks, because lift mass was a court-secured quantity. A line built before the Accord had networks worth lying through. A line no machine between Kessa and the world had ever been taught to sit on, because nothing intelligent had ever spoken through it. 30 hours of evidence, Yiv said. The warrant with its real seals, the recall codes, the blockhouse scripts, the voice annex naming Lantern 6, the route annex authored before the route existed, every casualty stamp. I've packed it to 900 kilobytes, and a freight conduit will carry 900 kilobytes in under 4 minutes. Formatted as a mass declaration anomaly, which lift control is required by court rule to hand to the duty clerk of the open bench unread and unredacted. The junction pillar is 11 meters inside the chicane. Somebody keeps the plaza's eyes elsewhere for 4 minutes, and the table's whole quiet machine gets bypassed by a cable older than my species franchise. Nothing, Kessa said. Keeps 22 pairs of eyes anywhere it chooses better than the most expensive object the six table ever produced, surrendering dead slow in the open. She looked at Asher. You get your walk. You're just not walking it alone, and it isn't a sacrifice anymore. It's a diversion. Try to be diverting. And for the first time in 30 hours, the man with no past laughed, startled, young, entirely real. The sound of someone discovering the people he'd been protecting all day had quietly turned around and closed ranks in front of him. Warden Second Rin, he said, wherever I was before they got me, I hope it had people like you in it. In the days that followed, the bench clerks logged one final statement from before the plaza, taken, like the others, in the great gathering in of witnesses, but this one had not waited for a summons either. She arrived the same hour as the memory surgeon, by a different gate, a Vishari advocate in formal robes, silver-eyed, 60 years old, who gave her name as Counsel Amrisa Dahl and her former occupation as schoolteacher, passenger berth 11, civilian transit hull mariner's patience. 18 years ago, her statement read, the table decided my transport had seen a thing it had not even understood it was seeing, a fueling stop, a hull with the wrong registry, nothing, a clerical nothing. The instrument they tasked to resolve us was 17 years old. I know this now from the warrant disclosures. That night, all I knew was that our drive failed in the dark between lanes, our beacon died, and a young human in a maintenance vac suit came through our airlock with the saddest eyes I have ever seen on a living being. The tasking, I have since read it, your clerks have it, was a hull loss resolution, all berths. He was alone, he was inside our systems, and we were already drifting dead. Resolving us required nothing but his absence. Instead, he spent 11 hours rebuilding a drive he had been sent to ensure stayed broken. I sat with him for part of it, because I was the only one aboard too foolish to be afraid of him, and I asked his name, and he said 6, just 6. And I said that was a number, not a name, and he said, 17 years old, tribunal, hands inside our drive up to the elbows, saving 38 beings against the explicit instruction of the only family he had ever been permitted. He said, then I suppose nobody's given me one yet. He put our drive back online, falsified his own telemetry to show the hull lost, and stood in our airlock while we limped for the lane. And I watched him through the port, and I want it recorded plainly because everything else in this proceeding is numbers and seals. He was crying, and his hands never shook. Both things. At once. That is what the sixth table built, honored bench, not the calm. The calm was theirs. The crying was his, and it survived everything they did. And 18 years later, your marshals tell me there is a deposition from a memory surgeon saying he chose a name for himself the day he cut their leash. Asher. I am a schoolteacher. I looked it up. In one of the old earth tongues, it means fortunate, blessed, happy one. Honored bench. The instrument they are asking you to declare equipment named itself happy on the day it finally owned nothing in the universe but its own hands. I have nothing further. I have waited 18 years to say that much. The convoy entered the western plaza of the Tellier Spire freight gate at the 31st hour, dead slow, 3 crawlers in file with their weapons visibly safed and slaved, and ahead of them, on foot, in detention grays, hands open at his sides, walked Asher Cole, down the exact center of the killing ground, at the pace of a man with nowhere better to be. 22 guns tracked him from the walls. Kessa rode the command hatch, head and shoulders in the open air, because if her warden's gray was going to be worn as a costume by murderers on those walls, then the genuine article would arrive standing up. 11 meters inside the chicane, Crawler 3 developed a thrown tread shoe, developed it convincingly, with sparks and swearing, and slewed to a stop against the junction pillar, and Warden dropped down into its shadow with a splice kit, and 4 minutes began. Reconciler Voth came out onto the gate's reviewing balcony to watch his property return. He was old Sarkeen, gray-crested, in an unmarked coat the color of wet slate, and he stood with his hands folded behind him like an examiner at a passing-out parade. And Kessa understood, looking up at him, that the man was savoring this, that under the budgets and the courtesy lived something that had missed its best instrument the way a craftsman misses a tool confiscated at a border and had hated every year of the missing. 6, Voth said, over the plaza address system, warm as a hearth. Look at you. Still walking into rooms like you're apologizing for the floor. Stop there, if you would. Asher stopped. 40 meters of open plaza between him and the gate. The crawlers held at the chicane behind him. 60 seconds gone of Yiv's 4 minutes. I want you to know it was never personal, Voth said. You were the finest thing the program ever made, the only one of the 9 the architecture never had to punish. The analysts said that proved the conditioning had taken perfectly. I knew better. It took so well because there was so little in you it had to bend. You wanted to be good, 6. We simply supplied the definitions. A sigh amplified regretful administrative, and then you stole the one document that holds 9 definitions and hid it where even you can no longer find it. And then that, child, is the whole of why this has to end here, on a freight ramp, instead of in a courtroom where some magistrate sets your secrets on fire in public. The ledger, 6. The Wick ledger. One sentence, where is it? And everyone behind you goes home. I've been told I can't remember, Asher said, his voice carried, unamplified level. By people I trust more than you, yes, the wipe. Thorough work, we tested it twice while you were in detention, did you know that? Orderlies with scripted phrases, both ignored, very disheartening. The warm voice cooled by exactly 1 degree. But the architecture was mine, 6, and I never once built a thing with a single door. Memory was the lock everyone could see. There was always a second keyway. We cut it deeper than remembering, we cut it where the work lives. In the hands, in the spine, in the part of you that catches a falling cup before you know the cup is falling. And Voth leaned forward on the rail and spoke down into the plaza the way a man drops a stone down a well to hear how deep it goes. And what he spoke was not trade tongue but a string of phonemes in no language Kessa's translator would touch, harsh and rhythmic and old. 9 syllables, then 9 more, ending in a rising tone like a question that already knew its answer. And the plaza held its breath, 22 guns and 18 wardens in one balcony, every being present watching the young man standing alone on the killing ground. And Asher. Cole tilted his head slightly, the way he had in the cradle bay when the convoy's engines changed, and waited politely for the noise to finish, and said no, just that, not defiance, not triumph. The mild, faintly puzzled refusal of a man declining a stranger's leaflet, and Kessa, watching the balcony, because by now she always watched what fear did, saw Reconcilor Voss' folded hands come apart from each other, and grip the rail, and hold it, as the deep keyway, turned and engaged nothing at all, because 3 years ago a young man in a gray clinic had guessed right. The voice could still reach the work, but the work answered to a hierarchy now, and the hierarchy had one name in it, and the name was not Voss. That used to open me, Asher said, into the ringing quiet, and there was no anger in it at all, which made it terrible. I can feel where it used to fit, like a coat hook in a wall after the coat's gone. You should have built me a single door, reconciler, then you'd never have had to find out which one of us the hands actually belonged to. He spread the hands slowly, palms up, showing the plaza, the walls, the balcony, the whole assembled machinery of the 6th table, what it had come for and what it could no longer have. They're mine. They were always going to be mine eventually. Every door you cut just taught me where the walls were. 3 things happened then, in the same long second. Far above, where the lift's thread caught the morning, a chime rang through the gate's address system, the automated voice of lift control announcing, as court rule required it to announce, the receipt of a sealed mass declaration anomaly, referred to the duty clerk of the open bench, docket pending, and Kessa saw the words land on Voth like a rail charge. Saw him understand in one breath what had been walking dead slow across his plaza for 4 minutes, and what had been splicing in the shadow of a thrown tread shoe. On the walls, 22 rifles came off safe in a single rippling click. And Reconciler Voth, with his evidence gone up a 300-year-old cable and his protocols dead in a coat hook hole in a young man's spine, and his 2 ready-written stories collapsing into a third he had never drafted, stopped being an institution and became only an old being on a balcony with 1 tool left and used it. Terminal order, he said. All stations, fire. What the plaza's cameras recorded in the next 200 seconds was entered into evidence in full, played once at normal speed and twice slowed, and the bench's own recorder noted for the permanent transcript that the chamber, on the 3rd viewing, was silent in a way the recorder had not previously had cause to log. The first volley killed the spot where Asher Cole had been standing. He was not in it. He had moved on the syllable fire, not away from the guns but toward the chicane, toward the convoy, toward the people, covering the open ground in a low, fast line that seemed to be made entirely of the gaps between shots, and the cameras caught what the wall gunners experienced. A target that was never where doctrine said a fleeing man would be, because he was not fleeing, he was hurting the entire weight of the table's fire away free crawlers and 18 wardens by being, every single second, the most valuable thing on the killing ground and the hardest to hit. Shields and smoke! Kessa was down inside the hatch and shouting, and the convoy answered like one body. Brell's launchers throwing white walls across the plaza mouth, crawler hulls swinging broadside to make steel cover for the dismounts, and her wardens did not run for safety, not one. They ran for the junction pillar where Yiv crouched, and for the wounded, and outward into the smoke after the young man who had spent 30 hours spending himself for them. Because that account had a balance now, and every gun in the escort had decided in the same breath to pay it. The cameras lost him in the smoke. The depositions of the reconciliation detail, taken later in custody by marshals, did not. He came out of the smoke at the west stair. The first trooper's statement read, and I had a clean sight line for half a second, and then my rifle was somewhere else, and my knee was the wrong shape, and he was past me. He said sorry. I want that in the record because nobody believes me. Mid-fight, full speed, my own rifle going over the rail in pieces. He said sorry, like a man brushing past you in a corridor. He went up the wall stair through 4 of us. The second statement read, we're contract elites. We cost more per year than the gate's whole garrison. 4 of us, prepared positions, interlocking arcs, 11 seconds. Nobody died. You understand what I'm telling you? Nobody died. We were armed and armored and trying to kill him, and he came through us like weather and left every single one of us alive. And I have been in this work 20 years, and that is the most frightening thing that has ever happened to me. Killing's easy. Killing's a budget. What came up that stair had a different ledger, and we weren't worth enough to be in it. They are trained to fight beings. The detail's own commander stated, third in the queue, his arms slung, his voice, the marshals noted, entirely without rancor. We were briefed we'd be fighting one asset, and I read the file, and the file was thorough, and the file understated him so badly I intend to testify about it at whatever proceeding ruins whoever wrote it. It listed his speeds, his tolerances, his scores, numbers. Nobody wrote down the thing you actually need to know, which is that he makes decisions faster than you make observations, and every decision is 3 moves deep, and all 3 moves are merciful. And the mercy is not a weakness. It is the most expensive flex in his entire arsenal, and he never once stopped affording it. We emptied a budget that has toppled governments into that plaza, and our total casualties were 2 dead, both ours, both killed by our own crossfire and him. Because the cameras, when the smoke thinned at the balcony, caught the end of it. Reconciler Voth at the rail with a sidearm out, aimed down into the chicane at the exposed signals tech still splicing at the junction pillar, at Yiv, 19 years old, whose evidence package was 2/3 transmitted. And the gray blur that arrived across the last 8 meters of open balcony not quite fast enough to stop the shot from firing and exactly fast enough to put a human forearm into the path of it. The round broke both bones. The arm did not move from the line of fire, and the second shot never came, because by then the sidearm was disassembled. The cameras showed it. Frame by slowed frame, a pistol coming apart into its constituent springs and pins in midair like a conjuring, and Reconciler Voth was face down on his own reviewing balcony with his wrists pinned in the small of his back by one hand belonging to a young man who was kneeling on nothing vital, whose blood was running freely off the balcony's edge, and who was saying the audio pickup was clear in trade tongue, politely, to the most feared office in the Accord. Sir, you're under arrest. I'm not entirely sure I have the authority to say that, so please hold still while I borrow some. And then, lifting his head, finding the command crawler with his eyes, the way the cameras caught him doing across all 200 seconds whenever he had a half-breath to spare. Warden's second RIN, 1 for the bench, intact. Your custody. I hear it's the safest place on the planet. The lift came down at the 32nd hour like a verdict. It came down full. Wardens of the Spire garrison, the real garrison, boots laced for parade because they had been pulled off honor rotation by a duty clerk's emergency docket, and with them in robes she had visibly thrown on over a night uniform, flanked by 2 bench marshals and carrying the sealed anomaly packet in her own hands because she had declined to let anyone else hold it, came Magistrate Orsa Liam of the open bench, author of the transfer writ, a small silver-furred being of considerable age who walked out into a smoking plaza full of zip-bound contract soldiers, dressed-down imposter wardens, 1 pinned reconciler, and 18 exhausted genuine wardens in a defensive ring around 1 bleeding human took in the entirety of it for the space of 3 breaths, and said in the voice that had opened 40 years of proceedings, well, I had questions for the morning. I see the morning has answered most of them already. Her eyes found Kessa, the rank chevrons, the convoy. Warden second. Your casualty list, then your report. Take your time with the first. Spare nothing in the second. The proceedings of the open bench in the matter of the 6th table ran 91 days, and the public galleries were full for all of them. Kessa Rin testified on 4 of those days. She gave the bench the causeway, the warrant listed by mass and blood type, the polite machines, the kill box at Relay Cradle 9, the 4-minute splice, the plaza. She read her own threat ledger amendments into the record in order, Category 4 to Category 2 to the final entry, and when the table's surviving counsel objected that a custody officer's speculative notes were not evidence, Magistrate Liam overruled with a single sentence that the news services carried to 40 systems by nightfall. The bench finds that this officer's notes constitute the only honest threat assessment any organ of this accord ever produced on the subject. and the bench intends to rely on them. The depositions came in like a tide. The freight master who demanded his scrubber be in the record. The registrar who had counted to 100 and peaked. The fight broker who had priced violence for 40 years and met the one being who sold control instead. The handler who had found the column missing from every ledger. The customs adjutant who had bet the other way. The memory surgeon, with her baseline charts, who stood in the well of the court and showed 40 systems the architecture of what had been poured into a child, and the school teacher advocate who told them what the child had named himself the day he cut it out. And on the 53rd day, the bench reached the question the whole sector had stopped breathing to hear argued. The table's foundational claim, renewed even now by its counsel because institutions drowned grasping at their own paperwork, that the subject was an instrument, a cord property, and that property cannot testify, cannot be wronged, and cannot be freed. The bench's finding ran 11 pages. The galleries only ever quoted the last paragraph, and the last paragraph said, "The table asks this bench to find that personhood, once erased, stays erased, that a being stripped of memory, name, and choice is thereafter a thing, because things are what its program required. The evidence finds otherwise. The evidence finds that they erased his memory, and the skill remained. They erased his name, and he chose a better one. They erased every instruction they had ever installed, and what remained unsupervised, unrewarded, unobserved, at cost to itself, over and over, in every deposition this bench has heard, was the instinct to protect. The table is correct that it built the instrument. The instrument is not what survived the wipe. The bench finds that what survived the wipe is a person, that he was a person throughout, and that the proper subject of this accord's fear was never the young man in the dock. It was the office that thought it owned him, so ordered. The sixth table did not survive its own disclosures. The Wick ledger saw to that, and the manner of its surfacing entered a cord legend alongside its owner, because on the 54th day, when a bench examiner asked Asher Cole under oath where he had hidden it, he answered truthfully that he had no memory of the hiding, none. The wipe had taken it whole. And then, in the witness stand, in front of 40 systems, his right hand, the one the plaza had broken, the one freshly out of its brace, picked up the examiner's stylus and wrote 11 characters on the docket pad without him. A freight bond locker code, tell your spire. Civic archive level, paid forward 30 years in untraceable script, registered. The archive clerks confirmed it within the hour, to a deposit. Condition unique in the registry's history. Contents releasable only into evidence, only before the open bench, only in a proceeding bearing the depositor's gene seal. And the depositor's gene seal had been laid on the locker 3 years before by a young man who had then walked to a gray clinic and burned the address out of his own head, trusting his hands to keep what his memory could not be allowed to. He had mailed the truth to the only courtroom that could ever force it open, and made himself the stamp. The orders live in my memory, he had told the surgeon. The work lives lower down. The bench entered the ledger, 9 names, 9 conditioning files, the entire command genealogy of the Lantern program, every authorizing signature going up and up into offices the Accord had believed were furniture. And the work, patient in the dark for 3 years, finished itself. Reconciler Voth received 206 consecutive terms, 1 for each name on the program's full casualty annex, and the sentencing record noted that he listened to all of them read aloud and said nothing but watched, the entire time, the young man in the third gallery row, with an expression the court artist rendered and no two observers described alike. The craftsman, said some. The bereaved, said others. And Kesserin, who was sitting beside the young man in question, and who had spent 91 days learning to read old fear in Sarkeen faces, said nothing in court, but wrote in her private log that night. He looked at Asher the way you look at the one piece of work that came out better than its maker, and knows it, and will spend 206 lifetimes failing to forgive it. The verdict's ripples ran outward for years, and the bench's archivists, who measure such things, recorded that the proceedings of the Sixth Table were requested by more foreign governments than any docket in Accord history. The Hesseris Combined Navy formally revised its human contact doctrine within the month. The revision's preamble, leaked almost instantly, contained the sentence that staff colleges across 40 systems would set as an examination text. Our threat models assumed human capability was the variable requiring measurement. The Tellier disclosures established that human capability is the constant and that the variable, unmeasured by any instrument we possess, is what they decide to do with it. A Drathi Intelligence Directorate, older and blunter, circulated an internal minute that also escaped, 11 words long. Stop asking what humans can do, ask what they keep choosing. And at the Accord's own academy intakes, where Kesserin's final ledger entry was now read aloud to every cadet class, The instructors added a single line of commentary, drawn from 91 days of testimony and approved at flag level, to be recited after it. Every file you will ever hold understates its subject. The teller file proves the understatement runs both directions. Write your numbers humbly. 8 files, 8 names, 8 lanterns still answering at their doors, scattered now into the holdings of whatever table remnants had slipped the net. Each one a person folded inside an instrument, each one a leash that, the bench now had proof, could be cut. The bench established the recovery directorate before the verdict's seal was dry, and gave it open writ marshal's authority and a name with no black bars anywhere in its charter. When the question of its escort command arose, Magistrate Liam appointed the only officer in the Accord whose threat assessments she had ever called honest, promoted her 2 grades over the objections of absolutely no one, and asked her, in chambers, whether she understood what she was taking on. "I moved one of them 300 kilometers, Magistrate," Warden Commander Kesserin said. "It cost my 5 wardens and every regulation I own, and it was the finest thing I will ever do." 8 more sounds about right. And when the question of a guide arose, of who could walk a recovery team into the architecture of a lantern's conditioning, who knew the program's doctrine like page numbers, who could stand in front of a built instrument and prove to it, by existing, that the door out was real. The directorate's first volunteer was waiting at the office door before the posting cleared, politely, the way a man waits who has already decided and is only sparing you the embarrassment of hurrying. They gave him a marshal's warrant card. He carried it the way he carried everything, as if it were slightly too generous, and he meant to earn it retroactively. The wardens of the old convoy transferred in as a body, Brel to gunnery, Suro to medical, Yiv with her arm-long commendation to signals command, and on the morning the directorate's first convoy rolled for the lift, bound for a cold trail and a door with a lantern behind it, Kesserin stood at the crawler hatch and watched her guide check the cradle bay last all the way he always did, making sure the restraints were padded, in case the one they brought home needed time to believe. "You never asked me," she said, as the engines came up, "what I wrote, the final ledger entry, the one the bench relied on. I assumed it was classified. It's published in 40 systems, Asher. It's quoted at academy intakes. Cadets recite it." Both hearts were level and warm. "You genuinely haven't looked." "It seemed," he said, "like the kind of thing that would be embarrassing to read about yourself," and the smile was the same one from the cradle bay on the first morning, the one aimed at making everyone else comfortable, except that now it stayed. So she recited it as the convoy rolled. "Threiger, detainee KR-77, final amendment. Category withdrawn. This office has spent 30 hours attempting to assign a number to the subject," and reports as follows. "The file understates him. The legend understates him. The table that built him understated him, and it had 11 years of telemetry and the original drawings. The danger was never miscounted. It is real. It is beyond this office's instruments, and it is the least important thing about him. What the record requires is the part every prior assessment omitted. The subject, possessing at all times the capability to leave, stayed. Classification, person, escort recommendation, be worth protecting." The convoy passed the plaza where the smoke had been, and the junction pillar with its new commemorative plate that Yiv pretended to find ridiculous, and polished with her sleeve every time she passed it, and swung east toward the lift, toward the thread of glass, toward 8 doors in the dark of the galaxy with a voice still calling good night down the corridor. "For the record," Asher said at last quietly, "watching the spire come up to meet them, I still don't remember why they were afraid of me. The wipe took it. It's never coming back, and I've stopped grieving it. And that doesn't frighten you, it did. The whole way down the underway it did." He flexed the once broken arm, thoughtfully, the way a man tests a repair he has decided to trust. "Then I worked out what the fear was actually made of, all of it, theirs, the files, even mine, and it stopped being heavy. They were all afraid of the same thing, Kessa. The thing with no number. The thing that survives the wipe." He looked over at her, and the gray eyes were calm the way deep water is calm, all the way down, and what lived in them now had a name it had chosen itself. "I don't remember why they feared me, but I've met what's left of me, the part nobody could take, and I know exactly why they shouldn't have. Let's go open some doors." The convoy reached the lift at the 9th hour and rose.